The sun had just begun to dip behind the tall buildings of the city, casting long shadows across the Grand Hotel. Its golden windows reflected the light, making it seem even more magnificent than it already was. Inside, the lobby was quiet, except for the soft hum of polished floors and the distant murmur of guests. At the center of it all, moving with quiet grace, was Lila. She had worked at the hotel for nearly a decade. She knew every hallway, every hidden corner, every guest's habit. She cleaned, polished, and served with care, never asking for praise or attention. She had seen rich travelers come and go, laughing, complaining, demanding, and sometimes even mocking her. She had learned to bend, to stay quiet, to be unnoticed, but always proud of the work she did. That evening, a new group of travelers arrived. They were dressed in fine clothes, carrying luggage that seemed heavier with gold than with clothes. Their faces were sharp, their eyes cold. They walked into the lobby, scanning the place as if the hotel existed only for their pleasure. Lila followed quietly, ready to assist if needed, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. "Who is she?" one of the travelers asked sharply, pointing at Lila. "She is our maid, sir," the manager replied politely, bowing slightly. The travelers whispered among themselves, laughing quietly, and then one of them, a tall man with a cruel smile, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Get her out of here," he said. "We don't want her in our sight." A hush fell over the lobby. Lila froze. She had never been treated like this before. No warning, no reason, just an order, harsh and absolute. Her heart pounded, but she straightened her back. She had faced injustice before, but this cut deeper. She looked at the man with calm eyes, hiding the storm inside her. I am sorry, sir," she said softly. "Did I do something wrong?" The man's smile widened, cruel and cold. "Do you need a reason? Leave. Now." The manager opened his mouth, unsure how to respond, but the travelers shook their heads. Lila knew there was no help coming. She had been ordered to leave, and leave she would, but she would not go quietly. She walked past the polished floors, her head held high. Guests watched in silence, some curious, some ashamed. Staff whispered behind counters, afraid to look directly at the travelers but wishing they could do something. Lila's mind was not empty, it was alive with thought. Anger burned quietly, but more than anger, there was a spark of planning, a spark of something greater than herself. Outside, the air was heavy with the smell of rain and dust. The streets were busy, people moving quickly, each lost in their world. Lila stood for a moment, breathing, listening. She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply walked, letting the cool wind clear her mind. She knew she would return. She knew she would find a way to make things right. The hotel loomed behind her, tall and intimidating. It had been her home, her stage, her battlefield. And now, the rich travelers believed they had one. They believed that one person, small and quiet, could be erased with a single command. They had no idea that Lila was not like the others. They had no idea that intelligence, patience, and courage were her true weapons. As she walked through the busy streets, she remembered every slight, every insult, every look of superiority she had endured over the years. She remembered the way the travelers laughed as she polished the floors, the way they ignored her when she spoke, the way they believed that her silence was weakness. But silence is not weakness, she thought. Silence is patience. And patience, combined with action, is power. By the time night fully fell, Lila had reached the small room she rented in a quiet part of the city. It was not much: bare walls, a small bed, a single lamp, but it was hers. She sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, her mind racing. She did not feel fear. She felt a quiet determination. The rich travelers had made a mistake, a grave mistake. They believed that someone like her could be dismissed, but they had no idea what they had started. Her plan was not yet ready, but she could feel it forming. Small steps, quiet moves, learning the hotel's secrets, understanding the travelers' weaknesses. She would return. Not as the maid they dismissed, but as someone they could never ignore. And when she did, it would not be out of anger. It would not be out of revenge. It would be just as quiet, clever, undeniable. As she closed her eyes that night, the city around her sleeping, she whispered to herself, almost like a promise, I will return. And in that promise, there was power. In that promise, there was hope. And in that promise, the rich traveler's world, built on arrogance and cruelty, had already begun to crack. Outside, the hotel shone in golden light, oblivious to the storm that was quietly forming in the heart of a maid they had underestimated. The streets were alive with noise, but it felt as if Lila moved through a different world. Cars honked, people shouted, street vendors called for attention, but none of it touched her. Her mind was elsewhere, circling around one thought, the hotel. The grand building, the polished floors, the rich travelers, they had no idea what they had done by sending her away. The first few days outside were the hardest. She had no job, no money to buy proper food, and no one to turn to for help. Every place she went reminded her of her status or what the world saw her as, small, invisible, unimportant. She applied for work at cafes, at cleaning jobs, anywhere she could find a place that would take her. Most doors closed in her face. Some people stared at her like she did not belong. But Lila did not falter. She slept in small, crowded rooms, ate what she could find, and carried herself with quiet dignity. She reminded herself that this struggle was temporary, a bridge to something greater. Each rejection, each insult, each moment of loneliness became fuel for her determination. One evening, as rain fell lightly, she stumbled upon an old library tucked in a narrow alley. The smell of books and paper wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She stepped inside, her curiosity piqued. The librarian, an elderly man with a gentle smile, watched her quietly as she wandered between shelves. What are you looking for, child? He asked kindly. Answers, Lila said simply. I want to understand the world, and the people who think they can step on others. The librarian nodded, as if he understood more than she could say. He handed her a thick book about property, law, and business. Knowledge is a weapon, he said. Use it wisely. Lila spent hours poring over the pages. Words like deed, ownership, and transfer filled her mind. Slowly, she began to see a path, a way to return to the hotel, not as a maid, but as someone with the power to change everything. Her eyes glimmered with quiet excitement. For the first time, she felt that her removal from the hotel was not a punishment, but an opportunity. Days turned into weeks. She took small jobs during the day, delivering packages, helping small shops, cleaning offices, but every night, she studied. She learned about contracts, loopholes, and the laws that governed property and ownership. She discovered that even a maid, unnoticed and underestimated, could wield power if she understood the rules and moved carefully. One rainy night, she overheard two men talking in the market. They spoke of the hotel's owners and their fear of losing control. Lila listened from a distance, hiding in the shadows. Her heart raced. This was the kind of information she needed, their weaknesses, their fears, the cracks in their perfect world. She did not act immediately. She waited, observing, listening, learning. Every careless word the travelers or their staff spoke became a tool in her hands. Every arrogance, every assumption, every dismissal became a step closer to her return. Despite her calm and careful approach, life outside the hotel was not easy. Hunger, fatigue, and loneliness often threatened to break her. Some nights, she sat alone in her small room, the wind rattling the windows, and wondered if she would ever get the chance to return. But she never gave up. She reminded herself that the rich travelers had made a grave mistake, they had underestimated her. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A small, tattered envelope arrived at her door. Inside was a note, simple and direct. You are not as small as they think. Watch closely. Opportunities come to those who wait. There was no signature. No explanation. But it was enough to remind her that she was not alone. Some people, perhaps few, had noticed her strength, her intelligence, her courage. And that was enough to keep her moving forward. As the days passed, Lila began to put her plan together. She knew she could not storm back into the hotel. She needed patience, timing, and strategy. She mapped the hotel in her mind, recalling every hallway, every office, every door where secrets might hide. She thought of the rich travelers' arrogance, their overconfidence. They believed they were untouchable. That belief would be their undoing. The night before her return, she walked the streets one last time, feeling the rain soak her hair and clothes. She looked up at the hotel, glowing in golden light, unaware that a storm was forming, not in the sky, but in the mind of a maid they had dismissed. Her heart was steady. Her mind was sharp. Her plan was ready. "I will return," she whispered into the night. But this time, it was more than a promise. It was a declaration. A quiet, unstoppable force that no wealth, no arrogance, no power could ignore. She had struggled, she had suffered, she had waited, and soon, the world that had rejected her would witness the power she had quietly gathered. Lila turned away from the hotel, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Behind her, the golden lights continued to shine, blind to the change coming. But she knew the rich travelers would soon see, and when they did, it would be a sight they would never forget. Lila returned to the city not as the same maid who had been ordered out, but as someone the world could not easily dismiss. Her steps were quiet, almost invisible, as she moved through streets she had once walked with bowed head. This time, she carried a notebook, filled with plans, observations, and strategies. Every detail mattered. Every mistake of the rich travelers had been recorded in her mind, and now it was time to act. She began by visiting the hotel's surroundings, pretending to be a customer, a guest, anyone but the maid they had dismissed. She walked past the golden doors, smiling at the doorman, who looked at her with polite curiosity. She listened carefully to conversations, watched patterns, and noted every weakness in their routine. Each moment of observation was a step closer to reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Her nights were spent in her small room, studying documents, researching laws, and understanding the legal threads that tied the hotel together. She discovered that the hotel's ownership was more fragile than it seemed. Hidden clauses, unsigned contracts, and outdated deeds could be her path to victory. Her mind moved like a chess player, each piece carefully considered, each move calculated. Lila did not act in haste. She knew that bold moves could expose her, ruin her plan, or give the rich travelers a chance to crush her. Patience was her ally. She created a disguise, a modest but neat appearance, a new name, and a polite, confident attitude. No one would suspect that the quiet woman in the streets was the same maid they had so easily dismissed. She found allies along the way, small helpers who did not judge her by color or status. A lawyer who owed her a favor from years ago, a clerk who respected her intelligence, and a few shopkeepers who admired her courage. With their quiet assistance, she obtained copies of property documents, learned the hidden clauses in contracts, and traced the hotel's finances. Every piece of knowledge became a brick in the foundation of her plan. Then came the day she tested the waters. Pretending to be a potential investor, she requested to see the hotel's books. The manager, unfamiliar with her new identity, welcomed her politely, showing ledgers, contracts, and financial statements. Lila observed every detail, her eyes sharp, her mind alert. She noticed the cracks, the small gaps in security, the careless mistakes by the rich travelers, and the outdated legal documents that could be challenged. At night, she returned to her room, reviewing her notes and mapping out the steps. She imagined the hotel under her control, not for power, but for justice. She wanted fairness for the staff, respect for hard work, and a place where people like her could not be dismissed without reason. Her anger toward the rich travelers had transformed into something stronger, a quiet, intelligent determination to change the balance of power. As she prepared, danger shadowed her every move. The travelers were cautious, hiring security, checking their accounts, and ensuring that no one interfered with their affairs. Lila had to move carefully, never revealing too much, never rushing. Every glance she gave, every word she spoke, was measured. A single misstep could expose her plan and end everything she had worked for. One evening, as she watched the hotel from a distance, she noticed a familiar face, one of the travelers laughing arrogantly in the lobby. They believed the world was theirs, that wealth could protect them from all threats. Lila smiled faintly. They had no idea that the quiet maid they had dismissed was planning their downfall with patience, intelligence, and law on her side. She also made small, careful moves to test their reactions. Letters, inquiries, and legal questions were sent subtly, leaving the rich travelers confused and slightly uneasy. Their confidence began to crack, though they could not yet understand why. Lila stayed in the shadows, watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, the plan began to take shape. The hotel's deed, the ultimate symbol of control, could be challenged legally. Lila had gathered enough information to show that the ownership was flawed, that the rich travelers had overlooked critical details. But she would not act until everything was perfect. Timing was crucial. One wrong step, and the hotel would remain theirs forever. The night before her first formal move, Lila sat by her window, the city lights twinkling below. Her heart was steady, her mind sharp. She remembered the day she had been ordered out, the humiliation she had endured, and the quiet promise she had whispered to herself. Tonight, she felt the power of that promise. It had grown, nourished by knowledge, patience, and determination. "I am ready," she whispered, her voice calm but full of strength. "Soon, they will see me, not the maid, but the force they never expected." Outside, the hotel's golden lights glimmered, oblivious to the quiet storm gathering against it. Lila's plan was ready, and the rich travelers' arrogance had blinded them to the coming change. Justice, clever and unstoppable, was walking quietly toward them. The hotel gleamed under the morning sun, its golden windows reflecting the world outside, oblivious to the storm about to arrive inside. Lila walked calmly down the street, her steps measured, her mind focused. Today was the day. Today, the quiet, clever plan she had nurtured in shadows would finally take shape. She was no longer the maid who had bowed and served. She was a force of intellect, patience, and quiet authority. She entered the hotel lobby, now under a new name, her appearance carefully chosen to mask her past. The doorman, the staff, even some of the guests, looked at her politely but with no recognition. Lila allowed herself a small, private smile. They had no idea who she was. They had underestimated her, just as they always did. The rich travelers were gathered in the lounge, discussing trivial matters, their laughter loud and careless. They had grown complacent, confident that the hotel and their lives were untouchable. But Lila had learned their weaknesses, their fears, their patterns. Every arrogance, every careless word, every ignored rule had been recorded in her mind. And now, it was time to use them. She approached the manager with polite authority. "I would like to review some documents regarding the hotel's ownership," she said softly. Her voice was calm, steady, with just enough firmness to command attention. The manager blinked, uncertain. "Of course, but may I ask your name?" "Lila Carter," she replied, giving a polite smile. "I represent interested parties reviewing the hotel's assets and legal standing." The manager hesitated but led her to the office. As the travelers continued their conversation in the lounge, oblivious to what was happening, Lila began her work quietly. She examined the contracts, the financial records, the deeds. Her trained eye caught errors and overlooked clauses that could be challenged. Slowly, methodically, she built the foundation for her confrontation. Minutes stretched into hours. The rich travelers began to notice her presence. One of them, the tall man who had ordered her out months ago, paused mid-sentence and glanced toward the office. Something about the way she moved, confident and calm, unsettled him. He felt a faint, unexplainable discomfort, but he dismissed it as imagination. After all, she was just another visitor, surely harmless. Lila, however, had planned for every possibility. When the tall man finally decided to approach her, she looked up calmly, her eyes meeting his. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. Her voice was soft, yet carried a weight he could not name. You are just a visitor here, aren't you?" he said, trying to mask his unease. "I am more than that," Lila replied quietly. "I am someone who has studied this hotel, its ownership, and its operations very closely. And I am here to correct some errors that have been overlooked for far too long." A murmur ran through the staff. Guests noticed the tension building. The travelers' confidence wavered for the first time. They looked at her, unsure whether to laugh or to demand answers. But Lila did not rush. She let the uncertainty grow. Then she presented the deed. It was official, signed, and undeniable. The ownership of the hotel, once thought secure in the hands of the rich travelers, had quietly been transferred through legal maneuvering and careful planning. The tall man's face went pale. His companions froze. They could not believe what they were seeing. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice shaking. This cannot be right." "It is right," Lila said calmly. "You underestimated the quiet, the overlooked, and the patient. But justice does not always arrive with anger or violence. Sometimes, it arrives with knowledge, planning, and timing. Today, it arrives for me." The travelers demanded explanations, their voices rising in panic. Lila remained calm, her eyes steady. She explained the legal errors, the overlooked clauses, and the careful steps she had taken. Every word was precise, every detail undeniable. They could argue, plead, or threaten, but the law, carefully understood and correctly applied, was on her side. Staff members watched in awe. Some who had once whispered about her now whispered about her courage and intelligence. Guests leaned closer, sensing the drama unfold. The rich travelers, arrogant and careless, had no shield against the quiet, deliberate power of a woman they had dismissed. By the time she finished, the lounge was silent. The travelers' faces were pale, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Lila's calm demeanor, combined with her undeniable preparation, left them speechless. She had returned, not with anger, not with rage, but with something far more devastating, the quiet, unstoppable force of justice. As she left the office, her head held high, the hotel felt different. The corridors no longer seemed like chains of servitude, but paths of opportunity. Lila had not only reclaimed what was legally hers, but she had also sent a message: arrogance and cruelty could be defeated by intelligence, patience, and courage. Outside, the sun shone brightly, reflecting off the golden windows. The hotel, grand and magnificent, now bore witness to a new era. Lila walked away with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the next steps would only strengthen her position. The rich travelers had faced their first defeat not through force, but through intellect. And the storm was far from over. The hotel was buzzing with activity, but something had changed in the air. Guests moved through the halls, unaware that a quiet revolution had already begun. Staff glanced at each other nervously, their eyes filled with curiosity and awe. Somewhere in the shadows, Lila prepared for the moment she had been waiting for months, the moment when the rich travelers would truly understand the consequences of their arrogance. She walked into the grand lounge, carrying herself with calm dignity. Her new identity and appearance made her almost unrecognizable, yet every gesture radiated authority. The rich travelers were gathered as usual, laughing and discussing trivial matters, completely unaware of the storm about to strike. "Excuse me," Lila said, her voice soft but carrying through the room. "I believe you have been misinformed about the hotel's ownership." The travelers turned, startled by her presence. One of them, the tall man who had first ordered her out, frowned. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to mask the unease he felt creeping into his chest. "My name is Lila Carter," she replied calmly, "and I am here to clarify a matter that has been overlooked for far too long." She held up the deed, official and undeniable. Every signature, every clause, every legal requirement had been fulfilled correctly. The rich travelers' eyes widened in disbelief as they realized the truth. This can't be," the tall man shouted, his voice trembling. "How is this possible?" "It is possible because you underestimated me," Lila said quietly. "You believed that my silence meant weakness, that my position as a maid meant I could be ignored. But patience, intelligence, and determination are far more powerful than arrogance." The other travelers scrambled, shouting, demanding explanations, pleading to see lawyers, but every argument fell flat. The deed was clear. The ownership of the hotel had legally shifted, leaving them powerless. Panic spread across their faces as the reality sank in. They had lost control over the empire they had so carelessly assumed was unshakable. Staff members watched in amazement, their respect for Lila evident in their eyes. Some who had once doubted her, whispered behind counters, now realized that she had not only fought for herself but had also changed the balance of power in the hotel. Guests leaned forward, sensing the drama and the triumph of the underdog. The room was silent except for the hurried whispers and shocked gasps of the rich travelers. Lila's gaze swept the lounge. She could see the disbelief, the fear, and the humiliation etched across their faces. Yet she did not gloat. There was no anger in her eyes, no desire for revenge. What she sought was justice, calm, clever, and undeniable. And now, it had been delivered. "You have been given a lesson," she said softly, "not through force, not through shouting or anger, but through knowledge, patience, and careful planning. Let this be a reminder that power earned through arrogance and cruelty is fragile. True strength comes from intelligence, integrity, and respect." The travelers' attempts to argue became frantic. Their voices rose in panic, but every word they spoke only confirmed Lila's victory. She remained poised, listening carefully, allowing their confusion to grow. Their empire of arrogance had crumbled without her ever raising her voice in anger. Then, with calm authority, Lila addressed the staff. "From this day forward, this hotel will be a place of respect. Every worker, every guest, will be treated fairly and with dignity. No one will be dismissed without reason. Justice does not mean chaos, it means fairness and opportunity for all." The staff nodded silently, relief and admiration washing over them. The guests, too, sensed the shift, realizing that the quiet strength of one determined individual could change everything. The hotel, grand and imposing, had been transformed not by wealth, but by the courage and intelligence of someone they had underestimated. As Lila left the lounge, the rich travelers were left staring, speechless and defeated. Their arrogance had been their downfall. They had treated a maid as insignificant, failing to recognize the quiet power of patience, intelligence, and careful planning. And now, the world around them had shifted irrevocably. Outside, the city glimmered under the setting sun. The hotel's golden windows reflected the light, but now, that reflection carried a new meaning. It was no longer a symbol of wealth and arrogance. It was a symbol of justice, courage, and the unstoppable power of someone who refused to be underestimated. Lila walked away, her steps calm and confident. The storm she had quietly prepared had arrived, and it had reshaped everything. The rich travelers would never forget this day, nor the lesson it carried. And as she disappeared into the evening, she knew that her journey had not been about revenge, but about proving the strength of patience, intelligence, and dignity, the true power that no arrogance could ever conquer. The hotel never looked the same after that day. The golden windows still shone, but now they reflected more than wealth, they reflected justice, courage, and quiet strength. Lila walked through the grand lobby, her steps steady, her head held high. Staff smiled at her with respect, guests noticed her confidence, and even the walls seemed to hum with a new energy. She had returned not for revenge, but to create a place where fairness ruled over arrogance. She moved through the hotel, greeting each worker with kindness. The cooks, the cleaners, the front desk staff, those who had been overlooked or dismissed by the rich travelers, now saw her as a leader. She listened to their concerns, understood their struggles, and promised them that no one would ever be dismissed unfairly again. The rich travelers had not vanished, but they no longer held power here. They were reduced to whispers of their former arrogance, unable to regain control. Lila had taught them a lesson without raising her voice, without a single act of violence. Knowledge, patience, and cleverness had been her weapons, and they had been more powerful than wealth, status, or cruelty. Lila spent hours reviewing the hotel's management, making small but meaningful changes. She improved working conditions, listened to the staff, and ensured that everyone had a voice. The hotel became a place of respect, where diligence and loyalty were rewarded, not ignored. Guests noticed the difference immediately. Service was smoother, the atmosphere warmer, and the energy lighter. People who visited the hotel spoke of the transformation, though few knew the story behind it. One afternoon, as she walked past the grand staircase, Lila noticed a young maid struggling with a heavy tray. She paused and offered help, smiling warmly. The young woman's eyes lit up with gratitude, and in that moment, Lila realized how far she had come. She had once been in that same position, dismissed and underestimated. Now, she had the power to make a difference. She continued her work quietly but with purpose. Every small act of fairness, every effort to help others, strengthened the hotel's spirit and reputation. Lila became a symbol not of wealth or arrogance, but of intelligence, patience, and courage. Staff and guests alike began to admire her, not just for what she had achieved, but for how she had achieved it, with dignity, wisdom, and unwavering determination. Outside the hotel, the city went about its busy life, unaware of the quiet storm that had reshaped one of its grandest buildings. But inside, the story of Lila's return spread silently among the staff and guests. It was a story of hope, a story that reminded everyone that courage and intelligence could change even the most powerful and arrogant forces. Months later, the hotel was thriving like never before. Staff who had once feared speaking up now offered ideas freely. Guests who had experienced indifference now found warmth and respect. Lila walked through the halls, listening, guiding, and inspiring. The hotel was no longer just a building, it was a living testament to the power of someone who refused to be underestimated. One evening, as the sun set and painted the city in golden light, Lila stood by the large window overlooking the streets below. She remembered the day she had been ordered to leave, the humiliation, and the struggle. And she smiled, quietly but proudly. That journey had taught her that strength does not always roar, it sometimes whispers, waits, and strikes with precision. I did it, she whispered to herself. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not for myself alone, but for everyone who has been overlooked. Her legacy was more than the hotel. It was the lives she touched, the respect she demanded for those who had none, and the lesson she left behind: arrogance and cruelty cannot withstand intelligence, patience, and courage. As the city lights twinkled below, the hotel glowed with a new warmth, a new purpose. And Lila, once dismissed and underestimated, walked through its halls with quiet pride, knowing that her journey had changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. She had turned injustice into opportunity, arrogance into humility, and silence into powerful action. The rich travelers would never forget her. And the staff, the guests, and even the city would carry the story forward, a story of quiet strength, careful planning, and the unstoppable force of a person who refused to be overlooked.